Hello and welcome to Self Power Now, where empowering women share their stories and advice about life, work, happiness, love, and success. I'm your host, Debbie Giussoni, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. So sit back and enjoy the show. I am so excited about today's show because it's about feeling good about life, about the world, about people, and sharing that with others. Our guest today is Dr. Lynda Ulrich. Lynda is the founder of the Goodness Exchange, the home for goodness around the world. I don't know about you, but just saying that makes me feel good already. The Goodness Exchange is made up of articles, podcasts, events, and a social media community built around celebrating all the remarkable efforts that are solving the world's most challenging problems. So, instead of focusing on what's wrong with the world, Dr. Lynda and the Goodness Exchange focuses on the enormous wave of goodness and progress in the world. And that equates to less fear and, get it, more joy, which is music to my ears since I'm all about focusing on the positive. Welcome, Lynda. Great to have you here.
Debbie, I'm so glad to be here. I'm sure we're going to take people on a little journey they couldn't have gone without us. And that's what we all should be doing in this world.
Exactly. I feel like we're kids playing house because I was on your podcast last week and now you're on mine. Like minds think alike, right? I think we need to amplify as many positive voices as we can. And I love what you're doing with the Goodness Exchange. And I have to say and admit, I'm a little bit jealous because for years I kept saying to myself, I should launch an all good news show, partly because I've been a Pollyanna, but also because everything I've been writing and teaching about in the last 2 decades, namely how to be happier in life, which takes a lot of finding the good in life, no matter what challenges we're facing. How did you determine this was something you wanted to do?
Well, it's interesting that you should frame it up exactly like that because I was a dentist all my life. My husband and I were very fortunate as young people. We were together since we were 14, and we had a life when we were very young that included traveling the world together, and we became Irish citizens. My husband played professional basketball abroad. And all through our early professional lives as dentists, we grew a dental practice that was uniquely focused on keeping the humanity in healthcare. And by that, I mean, we went the other direction. When most of medicine was going to treating us all like numbers and you had 7 minutes with your doctor and it was like becoming like a treadmill, my husband and I were finding something to celebrate with every single patient.
I love that. Celebrating dental work.
Yes,
Now that's a big stretch for most people, right?
Yeah. Well, the dental work was something that you got as a byproduct of being in Chuck and I's presence. What we would do, I mean, it became so much a part of our way of being with our patients, Debbie, that very, very commonly people come to their dental appointment on the day their spouse dies.
Wow. Why is that?
It happens a lot in our office because we have worked so hard to make sure people know that they are in the presence of trusted advisors with us and that we deeply care and that we know them as a unique human being. I mean, we have literally found something to celebrate with every patient. So when the patient comes in and their husband just died that morning, and of course I am so connected with people's lives that I know that he struggled with whatever for so long, I'm like, Janine, oh my gosh, I will never forget Paul's the way he lit up when he talked about barbecue. And he will be with me forever when I think about good eating and good company. And then instead of spending time awkwardly, we just have.
Now, wouldn't that patient cancel that appointment?
Yeah, but they would, except for they've come to count on us for this. Because the last time they came in, we celebrated. We know them well enough to celebrate that their son just graduated from engineering school. And the time before that, we knew what vacation they went on. And the time before that. So this is the opportunity. Let's go take what I'm just talking about to a really, really high level. At 100,000 foot look is that we all have this opportunity in each other's lives.
Yeah, I agree.
This is what your work is about fundamentally. This is what our work at the Goodness Exchange is about shining a light on wonder and goodness and possibility. Because here's the bottom line. The bottom line is what we give our attention to expands.
Absolutely. And that's the whole theory of like versus like.
Oh,
And when you're talking about your patients, regardless of what they were there for, I think that when we come together as human beings, we connect as human beings, right? And I could remember lots of people that I see on a regular basis, whether it's my hairdresser, right, my stylist, or my dentist, or my regular doctor, or someone that I get a massage from, or physical therapy. They come to know you and you build a relationship with that person that is actually very private, and it could be very positive because you want to talk about what's going on in life and you want to keep it positive. So I get that. I totally get why people would connect with you on that level, and also about paying attention to what's important. And what's important to me is paying attention to the positive, because like molecules will always attract more like molecules.
yeah, and this is the essence of what we're talking about right now in this little portion of this interview is something that I'm calling the gratitude economy.
Hmm.
So you just mentioned your hairdresser. This could apply to your dry cleaner or whatever. We all have somebody we drive across town for,
Yes.
right? Okay, these people are in our inner circle of what I call trusted advisors.
Yes.
So I've got a dry cleaner that, if I borrow a dress and I get wine stained on it, he'll look me straight in the eye and say, Lynda, you just better give that woman $250 for that dress that you just rented. Because you can pay me $100 to try and get the stain out and I won't be able to get it out.
Hopefully
Okay,
it
so
wasn't one of the rent the runway dresses where you have to actually give it back.
yeah, but what I mean is that in business, in our personal lives, in our families, we have this opportunity to really think of ourselves as part of a companion
Mm,
with others in this path, this part of the walk of life. And that if we look at it like that, we will develop a whole network of people who truly care, who can say hard things to each other
mhm.
and still survive and thrive after it. So what happened, back to my story, that I hope to encourage other people to follow, is that I was doing this other thing. I was fixing teeth with computers in 2003. So I was in like the 1% of dentists doing that sort of work. And yet I knew that it wasn't what I'm totally and uniquely built to contribute.
Mm,
Something told me that while what I was doing was remarkably important and rare, I really always had the notion that I was building, I was growing, I was learning exactly what I needed to learn for the second climb.
right.
Then what happened in my story is that, and you never know, I could go into that rift. There are 4 ways that people discover their purpose, and maybe that's another conversation you and I could have. But in either case, my story is very uniquely one of those 4. What happened was, here I was celebrating something with every single person, and one day I got an email, and I kept saying to myself, I should add, Debbie, I kept saying to myself, God, the negative news and social media is just getting weirder and weirder. I kept saying, somebody's got to do something about this.
Mhm.
Because my husband and I were seeing otherwise normal, cheerful people that we'd known for decades starting to go down the downward spiral, starting to have a lot of future fear.
I could tell you when that started for me,
Oh,
and
tell
it
me.
might be about the same time when 9/11 hit. I think that when 9/11 hit, everything shifted in news, and maybe it was just my personal world, but I used to watch news every day before 9/11, and then 9/11 hit, and then there were those images over and over and over, and that explosive fear that was hitting us all. And at that point in my life when 9/11 hit, and that week after that, I made a conscious decision to just stop watching regular news, and I have never gone back to that. And that to me was huge at the time, and it actually improved my life quite a bit as well. And I always advise people to take a break, people that are unhappy, people that are depressed, people that are not feeling good about life. One of the key things I always tell them is to take a break from mainstream media news, because if you pay attention to that, as you were saying, Linda, everything that you pay attention to expands. When you start paying attention to the main news media, which is a pretty depressing view of what's going on in the world, right? But I really truly believe it's only a small little bit of what's going on in the world, like the tip of an iceberg, and the rest of that iceberg has all kinds of great stuff happening that we don't ever hear about. It's not just that tiny little tidbit you get at the end of the news just for the, the little thing that the little bone that they throw you. I believe that the iceberg is filled with all kinds of great things, but we're all focusing on that very little tip, the squeaky wheel. And I interrupted your story about, and I want to hear about the soldier, but that was my aha moment with the news. And since that point, I think I've been thinking about, why isn't there just good news? Why can't we go to sources where it's just inspiring? I don't even want to use the word good. Inspiring us to be better human beings, right?
Okay, yes. And so you're one step ahead of me. Perfect. So what happened was I kept saying somebody's got to do something about this. And then one day I received an email from a nice young man who I'd known since he was a toddler. And he was in a foxhole somewhere bleak in the world. And he thought to write me, to ask me, is this real? Like, all the word he said things like, everything I hear from home is terrible. It's terrible here. It was a pretty hopeless email, the worst kind you can get as a professional, and because you feel so compelled to answer this with hope and something brilliant.
So I'm assuming if he was in a foxhole, he was on active war duty somewhere. He was fighting somewhere.
He had signed up for the army thinking that was his way to make the world a better place. And he came from illustrious military people, a long time. So it was logical that he made that assumption. But then when he found himself actually there and that all he heard from home was bad. So I had this challenge. And the only thing I had to meet it with, Debbie, is sort of funny. I had slowly over my lifetime curated a list of 20 of my favorite TED Talks that I would send to people in this state of mind. But that seemed to fall so far short of what this young man needed. So I went on a mad search for the internet for someplace with no politics and no ads. Because, those two things inject a level of agenda in every... Oh, and no religion. Yeah,
and no religion.
Because this kid was a different
too.
generation than me.
Yeah.
He was living in a different culture. And who knows what his politics were. So I had to leave all that out, or religion, and find some place where you could just find signs of hope and progress and some celebration of insight and innovation. And I tell you, my husband never saw me again for almost 2 days. I combed the internet. And finally, 1 hour, I just snapped and I said, it's not here. And that,
What year was that? Do you remember? How long ago?
That was 2013. Yes, it was November of 2013. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I stopped saying somebody's got to do something about this, and that somebody became me. And this is one way that people do find their purpose. It's one of the top 4, is that some event just comes at you broadside, and then you are powerless not to follow some new giant door that is open in front of you.
I think I want to just talk about that just a quick second, because my whole business is self-power now, and I think that sometimes we have to feel powerless to actually gain our power, and that's called self-empowerment, right?
That is absolutely true. That's it. My motivation became from that moment of powerlessness. I was unable to help this young man. My motivation, my everything that came next happened from that feeling of powerlessness. So absolutely. Yeah. So I found a local kid who was more web savvy than me. I was pretty technically savvy, but he built me a website, and I went off and I wrote 1 article a day on anything under the sun to prove it was still an amazing world. And I had a kid in it.
Were those articles from your own personal experience, or were you curating from other areas? How did you do that?
I was curating, but I was writing. I would find something and then I'd write an article around it. I'm really good at research. I'm super well read. I read every New York Times book on the bestseller list for business and leadership. And I'm really a student of philosophy and I'm very curious about everything. So I had a lot of material to share with the world. I'm kind of a maven sort. I love to share things that I find that are just like, oh my God, this changes everything.
That make people feel good, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's my thing too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I made sure that every single thing we put on this website called Ever Widening Circles had to prove that it was still an amazing world in some way. That was our byline. It is still an amazing world. And one thing led to another. My daughter graduated from Harvard in 2015, and we were Irish citizens, so she could have gone and lived in Europe or whatever. And she came to me and had a meeting on the porch one day, and she said, "Mom, I've looked at all the nonprofits in the world, and I think you got the best shot at changing the future, so I'll join you."
Wow.
So this brilliant daughter who thinks very differently than me, and I don't want you to think it was all daisies and roses. We probably hadn't spoken 100 sentences to each other all through our college years. There's still that,
which is probably pretty normal, right?
yes, there's
Mothers
still,
and daughters.
yeah. So we still have that, but it's a lovely creative friction because I am all visionary and 100,000 foot look, and she is all on getting things done and
nuts and bolts.
yes.
Well, that's the perfect team for any business, I think.
Right. So there's two practical things I want to throw in here for folks so that we don't get too far into our interview and have it come up at the end and then I haven't added anything practical to what people can do next. I want to add something to the negative news, just a perspective, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, and you may talk over and over again in the future of this podcast with people about this, is that, we can only be how our brain is wired. That's all we can ever be, is we are stuck with our the way our brains are wired.
I call it programming. I call it the programming that we come in with, right?
Yeah, it's the software though. I mean, it's the hardware I'm talking about. The software, we can change our perspective. We can use our cerebral cortex and be better critical thinkers. That's the software, but the hardware is the same. And what's going on is that we have this part of our brain, very old, called the amygdala. And the amygdala is where our fight or flight thing happens. It's our lizard brain. It's trained 24/7 to look for signs of danger and disorder. That's when we women are laying in bed at 3:00 in the morning and we smell one molecule of smoke and we sit straight up in bed. That is our amygdala on 24/7. And what happened in my world, fast forward to the internet, the advent of the internet, we didn't come with any user instructions. The internet, we just launched it and there was no driver's training or anything. We just started using it. And what has happened here is that it has become an attention economy. Nothing else matters in the 24-hour news cycle or the internet but capturing and holding our attention. That's the only thing that gets rewarded, is how many eyeballs they can get on their posting or their article or their headline or whatever it is.
Yeah. And that's my take on that whole, when it all started, 9/11, where they kept rehashing and re-showing the same video over and over and over again, which was horrific.
Yeah. I've never seen those videos. I have a very young and early tragedy in my life that taught me that I was a visual learner and I could never follow my impulses over a cliff on what I saw and couldn't unsee. And so I have never seen those videos. And I know that if I had, I would have probably been changed forever, maybe in a negative way. So even to this day, I turn away. But the part of knowing, I'm going to add something savvy to your listeners' way of thinking about the internet and the news. This thing that I call the attention economy, this way that every bit of content almost on the internet is built to capture and hold our attention, that gives us all the power. That is a double-edged sword because it
gives us the power to choose.
Yes, that's it.
But I have a funny story around that I had read, and I think I have the story in one of my courses too, about a grandchild watching her grandmother watch the nightly news that was just really, really, really negative. And she went to turn it off and she said, don't watch that. That's just really bad news. And the grandmother said something like, I have to watch it. I have to see what I have to worry about.
That is the fundamental thing that's happening with this part of if we go to the internet or the news on autopilot, what is in the driver's seat is our amygdala looking for signs of danger and disorder. So we're going to give our attention to anything that we need to know about. Because like back in the saber-toothed tiger days, that was important. We had to know what a twig snap meant because it might be a saber-toothed tiger. So this is how we're built. Mother Teresa was built this way. Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, this is our hardwiring. But the difference between ordinary people like us and a Gandhi or a Mother Teresa or an Abraham Lincoln is that they learned to pause. They learned to pause before they followed their emotions or what they're seeing or hearing over a cliff. And then they actively chose what's next. So to your negative news, the piece of practical advice I'll give people is this. I go to the news very deliberately now. And I listen. It takes me 12 minutes to get into my dental practice. I turn on NPR, choose some place that's trying. That's all I can say. There's people who argue with me about.
I do the NPR. Okay. I have the NPR choice on my Alexa daily news, which is literally about, 4 minutes of news. And sometimes I turn that off too, because that's not good enough.
Well, and I listen to the BBC back. So I have 12 minutes of NPR and 12 minutes of BBC back, and they're the least hyperbolic news agencies I can find. But I definitely will learn the things that I need to know about to make better decisions today or tomorrow, because I really think that there's something about knowing about the wider world that helps us make better decisions, because we do have to give our kids good direction. Or
You sort of have to know what's going on. I mean, exactly.
yeah, yeah. But if I don't hear about it in those two 12-minute segments, that's it. It's out of my zone. And here's what I want people to leave with: this notion is that the news is only the news. It's only newsworthy because it's so rare. This thing that's happening happens so rarely that it's newsworthy. If it happened all the time, it's like, yeah, we're going to hear about the plane crash, but we're not going to hear about the 470,000 planes that landed smack dab in the middle of the runway every day.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And that's sort of like my tip of the iceberg kind of analogy too. It's kind of like, it's just what happens on that very tip. It's not the whole thing. It's
Yes.
just what stands out.
No.
Wow. I love that.
No. But what's happening in our brains now, this is hardwiring too, is that we think that repetition is proximity. So remember, back in the caveman days, we had to learn. Let's say we were out picking berries with our family, and all of a sudden a twig snapped and a saber-toothed tiger jumped out and grabbed our little sister and ran off with her, and we never saw her again. The way that would work in our brain is that we would go back to the camp that day, and we'd be sitting around the campfire telling our little band of 17 people that we roamed the earth with. I'm talking 40,000 years ago. That's how it was. That's how it looked. We think that. Scientists think that. Okay, so what part of that story would we tell around the fire that day? And what part would everybody remember? They would remember that the meaning of a twig snap meant that a saber-toothed tiger was just about to jump out. That was the part of the information that would keep us alive the next time we were picking berries, right?
Survival, right?
So, yes. And so while the twigs are snapping all around us all the time, we knew that when we were vulnerable or unprotected or outside the safety of our big group or whatever, when a twig snapped, we needed to pay attention then. And so how our brain works is proximity is built on, like, how near to this danger are we, is built on how many times we hear this thing. So that's why after 9/11, 24 hours a day, it was video after video after video, 24/7. And our brains were going, oh my God, they're coming for me. That's going to happen in my town.
Yeah, the fear. Instead of what I call crowding it out with others. I use this term crowding out for a lot of things, for health reasons. Like if you want to eat better, you have to crowd out the bad foods, right? If you want to have more positive people in your life, you need to crowd out those that really get you down. And it's the same thing with news. If you want to have a more pleasant experience in life, you've got to crowd out the stuff that's not so pleasant, and it minimizes it. Instead of expanding it, it minimizes it, right?
Well, it puts it in the right perspective, because that's the thing. Remember, when our minds hear something 12 times a day, it makes our minds are built to think that's very near, that it could very likely happen to us. That's just the way our brains work. And we have to tell ourselves a better story or ask ourselves a better question. Like, there's no skyscrapers in Lincoln, Illinois, where I live. There's no airplanes coming for Lincoln, Illinois, and my children.
Well, that's a technique, right? It's crowding out. It's crowding out with good stuff.
Yes.
And I always say the opposite of fear is love, right? Is crowding it out with more loving thoughts about yourself, about the world, about the people around you, and sharing kindness. And as you mentioned, gratitude. All that's extremely important in order to crowd out the bad stuff. And I'm not saying to be a Pollyanna in the sense that you're not aware, as you said, you're still aware of what's happening in the world, but it's important to be aware that that's, as you said, it's the thing that gets noticed because it's the rarity. It's not the norm.
So one of our problems in this world is that we're black or white, where it's this or that. And that's how we can hold what's happening in our world in both hands, is to make sure we're using our critical thinking part of our brain instead of our amygdala. Like you just said, is to say, oh, I can make my next decision based on fear, or I can make my next decision based on love. It is my choice.
Exactly. There's something in one of my courses that I talk about, and that is whenever you're making any decision, and of course, you have to have that pause, what I call the pregnant pause first, because you can't make the decision without the pause first. But when you pause, ask yourself, what would love do? What would love say? What would love think? What would love feel?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the choice of our times right now. When we see something on social media that gets our dander up, we have a choice to act out of a fear or anger or love. And I'm thinking that more and more of us are leaving that posting unrecognized or
Right.
unclicked. More and more, most of us are really searching for thoughtful, helpful, measured voices.
And to your point earlier, because I do want you to, since you mentioned it about finding your purpose, I think that it's important for people in that respect to also find their own purpose and their stand in the world. And you mentioned the one thing is to really kind of get hit sideways, right? And get to a point of rock bottom. And that sometimes leads people to their purpose. I know for me, that had a lot to do with what was going in my life. What are the other three, very quickly, ways you can find your purpose in life?
Well, you can be hit broadside and then change forever, and you pulled along then for the rest of your life, which is what happened to me. But, over at the Goodness Exchange, our 2000 articles and all our podcast interviews are with people who have found their calling. They're doing the most extraordinary things in the world. And I mean, there's Damien Mander, who's discovered that single mothers make the best game wardens in Africa. Yeah, that's an incredible story. Put Damien Mander in the search box over there and get ready. But he isn't a great example of somebody like me who had a life experience that changed everything. But there are a lot of people who discover what they're uniquely built to contribute by just being curious. So the second way to discover your purpose is to be radically curious. Just allow yourself to follow your passions. If somebody said, what kind of documentaries would you watch if nothing else mattered and you just got to sit and watch anything about learning to play the guitar or paint watercolors or where I always had a fascination with New York Times bestseller lists about business and leadership. No matter what it is, follow your curiosity. So that's how a lot of people discover their purposes. They follow their curiosity down rabbit hole after rabbit hole until a pattern emerges. And then they start saying, well, gosh, I now know so much about this thing. I can share it with others.
Right. And what's that thread that you can integrate into whatever you're doing? Exactly.
Exactly. That's the second one. Now, the third one is to find somebody who you can see could be like a mentor or somebody who's actually living the life you wish you were living. And maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a neighbor, whatever. Start hanging out with people who have found their purpose.
Which goes back to the like minds, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Start hanging out.
I love that. Yeah.
Choose who you're getting involved with. And there's a fourth way. Now, those three are all mentioned in a very important study by a psychologist at Cornell. But the fourth one that we've discovered on the Goodness Exchange in these many articles that we've written about people doing the most extraordinary things is that some people just keep starting things and persevering. I recently interviewed an amazing man named Jason Conley. He's a London businessman who has the largest firm in Britain for placement of lawyers. Now, that sounds pretty boring. But I'm telling you what, my husband thought that was
still a people business. That's a people business.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
But he is such a great example of somebody who's had one life twist after another. And he kept failing, but he kept persevering until he landed exactly in the place that he's meant to contribute.
I love that. And I always tell people, fail gracefully. It's going to be part of life.
Yes.
Fall down, get up. You learn from every experience, and everybody can do lots of different things before they really find what it is that's going to be their big thing, right?
Oh, and let me tell you, Debbie, you have a great way of putting this fail gracefully and this changing your dreams up and all this stuff in such an important light. I mean, we should be transparent about this. This is the reason why I'm on Debbie's podcast, is because she was on mine. And you can find Debbie's interview. It should be publishing after January. So if you hear this podcast after January 2022, you'll find Debbie there on the Goodness Exchange in perpetuity. But I'm telling you, Debbie, you have a great way of putting that. My producer was on the line with me after our interview was finished, and she began to cry.
Oh my goodness. I hope they were happy tears.
Oh, they were. She felt so empowered. Talk about empowerment. She felt so empowered by the insights that you shared in that interview, that she was teary-eyed.
Wow. Thank you.
This is all of our journey. There's something that everyone who's listening to this podcast interview can uniquely contribute to the lives of
And
others.
I love how you put that uniquely
Yeah.
contribute, because when I think about all the souls in the world, all of us, all the human beings, I think that we each have our own sort of very unique thread. And that thread is made up of, colors and angles and shapes that's not the same as anyone else's in the world. And if you could just find your unique thread, wow, you can do fantastic things in the world for sure. So I love that you say not just finding your purpose, but how can you contribute? Because we are all here to make a difference in other people's lives. And it doesn't have to be something big. I mean, you're doing something huge, but it could just be making a difference in your child's life. I mean, it's how you serve. You're always here ready to serve. So, how can people get connected if they want more good news in their life, if they want more positivity, if they want to find, what is the way that they could serve, maybe by others' examples? How do they connect with what you're doing? Because I mentioned early on in the podcast all of these things, articles, podcasts, So what's the first step?
Okay, the first step, I'm going to give people 4 steps. The first step to really understand the scope of what's possible for us as individuals and for society as a whole. I have a 12-minute TEDx talk that's called Exposing the Conspiracy of Goodness.
Love it.
Now, I'm telling you, I was asked to be the closing speaker for one of the largest, oldest TEDx events in the country, November of 2020. And that just came out of me at that 12-minute talk, and it really will give people the steps to take and the story of the conspiracy of goodness. It's not something I came up with. There's an actually event in history that I refer to, and my point in the TED Talk is that we're in the middle of a similar event, a similar transformation right now.
Yes.
So the first thing I would do to get a spring in your step is to go listen to Exposing the Conspiracy of Goodness TEDx talk that I did, and that sets you on the right track. And the second thing I would do is start looking for evidence that it is still an amazing world. What you give your attention expands. So whether that includes going to the Goodness Exchange and being a part of the community there, and getting access to all these stories of insight and innovation that we're not hearing about on the news, and being introduced to people. We have a social media community built into the Goodness Exchange, so you can find other like-minded people who also care about goodness and progress and who are making a difference in lots of ways. So I would go to the Goodness Exchange, and I don't mean that in a self-serving way. It's if I knew another place on the internet like the Goodness Exchange.
Right. Well, there's so much up there. I mean, if you go up there, listeners, you'll find something that resonates with you. You don't have to do it all, but you'll find something. And as Lynda said, just, listen to her TED Talk first. Lynda, thank you so much for your happy, wonderful, insightful presence here today. I just love talking with you, and I think we're gonna talk more both on your podcast and on my podcast in the future. Listeners, if you'd like to connect with Lynda or the Goodness Exchange, you can find those links on our episode page. I wish you all a wonderful day, and I hope you come back and join us next time. Thanks for listening to Self Power Now. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with others, follow it on your favorite podcast platform, and join our community on selfpowernow.com and receive 3 free happiness gifts. And while you're there, if you're looking for more ways to be happy, healthy, peaceful, and loved, check out my books and new online courses. Until next time, this is Debbie Jasoni wishing you self-power now.